Hi, my name is Zach Hochkeppel, and I am the Vice President of Marketing for EMI Jazz and Classics, which encompasses Angel Records, which is our classical crossover and Broadway label, Blue Note Records, which is our, obviously storied jazz label, and Manhattan Records, which is more of an adult-oriented pop label. We also have EMI Classics, which is a straight core classical label as well. So, the label group is basically a full-service label for adults. We don't really make records for the usual record buyer that most of the other labels are interested in. Our audience is 25 to 54 primarily, and it bleeds younger and older than that, but that's our core. So the things that usually populate the minds of record labels, things like radio, top 40 radio, commercial radio, and MTV don't really apply here. So a lot more emphasis is placed on marketing and publicity, especially for our things, because we have to figure out new and different ways to reach the adult demographic who has been disenfranchised by the youth-obsessed media of today. So it presents a challenge, but it also makes for a more pleasant atmosphere because you don't have to deal with some of the more ridiculous aspects of the record industry. And it also is less expensive because you don't have to spend silly money on things like music videos and radio promotion and other sort of silliness. So what I do is after a record is delivered, or after we've decided to sign an artist that we've seen, we kind of start assessing their marketability and try and really gauge what they have and what we can give them, as far as, try and figure out what their story is. If their story is they're just an amazing musician, which is, most of our roster, certainly on the jazz and the core classical side, then that will largely be enough. Unfortunately, from a marketing point of view, that doesn't give you a lot to work with. So we'll try and we'll start identifying marketing stories and hooks that we can, stories that we can tell, whether it be from a press point of view or a radio point of view or a marketing point of view. I oversee both the product management side of things and the marketing department, inclusive of new media marketing. So product management is basically the shepherding of a project through the release schedule. So you basically, while the music is being recorded and after the record is being delivered, that's when the product managers kind of take over and just work with the artist and their management to create the artwork, to start crafting the marketing plan, to liaise with the different departments, publicity, radio, sales, etc., to create sort of a image that will run throughout a campaign, which will start with things like photo shoots and album packaging, but we'll also run through things like advertising. We might create what we call EPKs, electronic press kits, that sort of tell the story of the record or of the artist. Any other promotional materials that might be created, posters or tchotchkes or what have you. So that's what the product manager is, sort of the nexus of all of the activity around a project, and they are the kind of quarterback for each individual project. We have 4 project managers who work on Angel, Manhattan, and Blue Note projects, and we basically assign them to the project, and they, as I say, shepherd it through the whole process. And they work with our publicity folks and our radio folks and our sales folks to make sure that every department has what they need and that the artist's sort of vision for the way a project is to be presented is fulfilled. So after they've worked with our A&R department to fulfill their musical aspect, which is obviously their first and foremost concern, the product manager will be their sort of their contact to make sure that that musical aesthetic and that the sensitivities that they have run through the whole project. So yeah, so that's what we do. We'll basically, we'll meet with our finance and sales people and determine the viability of a project, what we think a project can sell, which, you know, once it gets down to brass tacks, we do have to stop looking at them as artistic endeavors and look at them as, well, not as widgets, and not as product, but as something that needs to be marketed and sold and bought. So we will get together with the marketing departments and the sales and finance departments and really kind of get a realistic sort of range of sales so that we can determine a budget with which we can market these records, determine what the advertising outlay will be, determine with the radio department if there's any shot at any kind of radio, whether it be non-commercial radio, which is our sort of lifeblood, you know, whether it be jazz or eclectic radio, college radio, etc., or if we can go to what they call AAA radio, which I believe is alternative adult album format radio. So it's basically your folk-oriented stuff. There's a handful of radio stations around the country that are commercial, AAA stations, KFOG in San Francisco, WXRT in Chicago. But most of the stations are non-commercial stations, either affiliated with colleges like WFUV in New York City, which is affiliated with Fordham, or you know, or are just non-commercial community stations. So they are usually they aren't hit-oriented. They don't. They usually play albums and pull different tracks, so it fits much better with what we do on the non-jazz, non-classical tip. So the Norah Jones, Amos Lee, Raoul Madon side of things. So we will decide what we have and the how many records we think it can safely sell, and then create a budget. And then with that budget in mind, we will start crafting a marketing plan, which will include, you know, depending on the scope of the project, will include print advertising as well as radio or television advertising if the project is a little larger in scope. Independent marketing efforts. This is a big thing for us because we can't depend mostly on things like radio and MTV, those kind of outlets that most of the record industry depends upon. So we have to kind of go to where the adult demographic lives and get them to hear our music. And so we do a lot of independent marketing, which encompasses reaching out to various independent marketing companies that have relationships with things like bookstores. There are companies that do outreach to bookstores and put music into bookstores. There are companies that do outreach to spas and salons. So if the music is more in that vein, we can do that. A singer-songwriter record works really good for bookstores. A more new age or world-leaning record works very good for spas or salons. A smooth jazz type record works very good for certain kinds of hair salons. We'll also work with companies that place music in hotels, that, you know, so that when you go to a hotel room, there'll be a little sampler waiting for you that you can play. We'll work with companies that place music in commercials, like advertising and stuff like that, or movies. So we'll talk to our friends at licensing, which is, you know, basically the actual placement of songs in TV commercials or TV shows or films, and try and get our artists placed in those kind of places, because it's just those kind of impressions. When we can't count on commercial radio to play our songs 10 times a day, we have to count on people either hearing the music, seeing the artist, or hearing about the artist as many times as possible. We have to create these impressions. So we depend a lot on our press department to to get print and radio items placed, you know, to get writers excited about an artist so they'll write about them. And they also will work with the TV shows to get the artist to perform on either morning or late night television shows. But if we can't depend solely on that, we can't certainly depend on radio to help us out so much, so that we have to make sure that there's other impressions, whether it be hearing it in a bookstore, hearing it on television, in a TV commercial or in a TV show, seeing the artist as a part of an advertising campaign for something else. Like Wynton Marsalis has a lot of side sort of licensing type things he does, like Movado watches, where he's the face of Movado watches in their advertising. So just anything we can do to heighten the profile of the artist, to get the word out, and then to encourage word of mouth, which you know, is another thing that we depend on much more than other labels, is something like a Norah Jones or an Amos Lee is very much dependent on friends telling friends that, have you heard this new artist? And nurturing sort of the sense of discovery, that this is an artist that's theirs, and encouraging that sense of ownership so that they'll spread the gospel for us, so that we don't have to work so hard, and frankly people are going to trust their friends basically saying something that's coming from their heart a lot more than a record company trying to push something down your throat. So I mean, that's a word of mouth, and the cultivation thereof is a little harder to do, and you can't really push it so hard because then it stops working. But we do work with our new media department to create tools to get out so that people, if they are so inclined, can share you know, information and music online. You know, we'll create new media tools that friends can send to friends, and we'll work with our new media department to maybe even hire independent marketing people on the new media side to try and help viral things happen, you know, to try and make connections in places like MySpace and various other websites that might be what they call affinity websites, you know, for an artist. You know, if it's similar to, you know, if we have an artist that fans of Dave Matthews might like, maybe we'll try and do some outreach to the fan sites for Dave Matthews and say, hey, check this out. Always being very conscious not to lurk, to look like we're trying to say we're not a record label and to insinuate ourselves, because people, once they smell that or sense that, they'll shut off. So it makes our job a little more subtle, and sometimes it doesn't work, but it also makes it a little more cost effective, because you don't have to spend huge amounts of money doing these things. It's much more letting the music speak for itself, because the one thing that we do here is we release good records, and if they sell, you know, which is our first prime objective, it's wonderful. But if they don't sell, then it's just that we're doing a service to the community and the musical world and posterity by putting out music that kind of begs to be put out. So we have kind of dual objectives, and obviously we have our financial sort of needs to fulfill, and it is a business at the end of the day. But because of who we are and the record labels that we represent, and the legacy that they have, we have an added objective that we have to kind of keep up our end of the bargain as far as making sure that new music and important music is put out there. So that's what I do in very general, broad strokes, and oversee a staff of about 6 now that do all the various marketing and product management items. Most of my job is one of diplomat and therapist, making sure massaging egos and making sure people play well together, and making sure artists and their managers think that we're on their side, or rather know that we're on their side, because of course we're on their side. You know, just making sure that everybody is on the same page. So it can be a lot of fire drills and putting out fires and massaging egos and just looking a few steps ahead. When I was in college, I was a European history and literature major. It's a fabulous proving ground for the record industry. I decided during my years in college that I thought that this would be the appropriate industry for me because it combined things that I liked. I always loved music, and I always loved show business and the idea of show business. I was always a fan of the history of show business, whether it be record industry or music or the film industry or something. So I was attracted to it that way, and I realized that I was not going to be a teacher, and I was not going to be a writer, and I was not going to do anything. I wasn't going to be a historian or a work in a museum or anything like that. So I just looked at my college as is not so much a like a vocational place where you learn how to do a skill, but somewhere to hone more general skills, writing and decision making and multitasking and stuff. So once I graduated from school, I decided to move to New York and find a job in the music industry. And so with my European history and literature degree and my job as waiting tables, I kind of started just networking and trying to find a job. I did not do what a lot of people do, which is intern during my college years or when I first arrived. Though I wish I had. It would have been a good preparatory thing. So I just kind of started at the bottom of the heap as an assistant, though I was an assistant to a president of a record label, a second assistant. So I was I would do the more mundane things. So that was my first job in the music industry. And basically, I worked at Angel Records, which was one of our, no, actually, I'm sorry, I lied. My first job was at RCA Victor. And I worked there for a few months in the marketing department as sort of a staff assistant. And that was good. It was a sort of a classical crossover and Broadway label. And also had ECM Records, which is a more cutting-edge sort of jazz label. So it was an interesting introduction to music that I sort of knew, but just it was easier at a smaller niche label like that to learn a lot about everything, rather than going to a massive, big major label where you would get a very narrow view of one department. You would be in the radio department and all you would do is radio. But at a label like that, you did a little radio, you did a little press, you did a little marketing, you did a little of everything. And after a few months, I was able to wangle myself this job as the assistant to the president of Angel Records, and then impressed the president so that he gave me a job as associate product manager for projects. So I was just basically just kind of networked my way around and parlayed one job into another. I did kind of stumble upon marketing and product management as my sort of thing, just because I think I had some good skills to do it. So from there, I've been in the same family of labels here at EMI for the last 10 years and just worked my way up, moving from Angel to Blue Note Records at one point, and then they merged the labels into one entity to form EMI Jazz and Classics. So I then took over marketing for the entire group and worked on, was able to parlay successes into further opportunities. So had a lot of success with an artist named Sarah Brightman in the classical crossover realm, which gave me a lot of ability to do lots of high-level marketing endeavors, so that I showed my skills there. And then moved over to Blue Note, where we had lots of wonderful success with Nora Jones and Al Green and Anita Baker, as well as scores of amazing straight-ahead jazz artists, Cassandra Wilson, Diane Reeves, and you know, instrumentalists galore. So basically was able to show my chops there, and obviously highlighted by the Norah Jones success, so that they gave me the vice presidential role over the entire label group, heading up marketing efforts across the different labels, which is where we are now. Some artists are oh so eager to be molded to be more marketable. Most of the artists that we deal with are not. Why they come to us, for the most part, is because they have a musical voice that is already very well developed, and they know from our reputation that we are very respectful of that. That being said, a lot of artists who are with us for many records and want to make a leap to another level will ask us, well, what should I do? Like, what is a good marketing-driven record that maybe I should try? And, you know, as long as you're kind of just giving them a direction to go to and not, you know, trying to mold them too hard, you can definitely have an effect. Now, at a pop label or at another, you know, hip-hop label or something, you can have an enormous effect. You know, as far as, you know, what we try and do is find, for instance, maybe we'll suggest duet partners. We'll suggest people that they can open for, that can create sort of more organic developments on the marketing side. You know, you can have as much influence or effect as the artist will let you. Some artists who are really hungry and really just want to be stars will basically come in and tell you that they'll do whatever you want. They'll record the songs that you want. They'll look the way you want. And, you know, that's a very American Idol kind of approach, and it can work, obviously, if somebody like Clive Davis and those kind of folks are doing it. They're masters at it. We're not as good at forming people out of clay. We're much better at polishing gems and shining light on what people do as a rule, than actually forming their careers. We're there to help them. You know, a lot of times artists will come to us and they won't have a manager or they won't have an agent, and that's where we can help them a lot. Is try and you know, give them instruction as to who might be a good partner for them to, you know, in the management or agent world, who can help them find their voice. But you can have a lot of effect. You can have a lot of effect on imaging. You know, some artists come in and, you know, they're wonderful musicians, but they don't know how to dress or they don't know how to present themselves. You know, you can help them out with media training. We have a lot of artists who are, you know, they don't get out of the rehearsal room a lot, and they want help in doing interviews and making sure it's not so much that you're changing who they are, but just making sure that what they want to convey is actually conveyed. So we'll hire media consultants to come in and work with artists who need it or who think they need it, just to figure out how to do interviews right, just so they don't say something silly. And at first, a lot of artists are very, they don't want it, they don't think they need it, they think it's somehow artificial, but then they do a couple of interviews and see how they come off in print or on television and go, all right, I need some help. So you can definitely affect an artist quite a bit. I mean, packaging and advertising and things like that can have a lot to do with how an artist is perceived, or how, whether an artist is accepted or not, or if you've given a chance. You know, the right album cover or the right pithy ad, you know, might be the difference for somebody picking up a record or not, and giving it a chance, or might be the difference, you know, the right press release or the right presentation to our folks, you know, in the publicity realm, in the press, might make the difference between them looking at that package and the dozens of other ones they have. So you can have an enormous effect, I think, for certainly what we do, and for serious, real, like non-hit driven music, for more career driven artists. marketing has to be very careful about not getting in the way and not overemphasizing their role too much. It's extraordinarily important, but especially for what we do here, it's almost like you have to reinvent the wheel every time. You have to. Each project is such a different animal that you have to be very careful not to try and put it in a mold or try a cookie cutter approach. But there's so much a marketing person can do and be imaginative if the artist is willing and able to explore different avenues that some might perceive as selling out, but which has gone kind of as a quaint old sort of notion these days, where you see artists like Death Cab for Cutie or something who is licensed all over the place and is on the OC, but still is able to manage have some kind of street cred and sell a lot of records. So people are finding the sort of common ground that even for credible artists or serious artists that you can have marketing and you're not going to be thrown out of the real artist club. Well, I think it's really important for folks to know their history, and even if you love one kind of music, you really have to be very open-minded and know what's going on in every other kind of music. I don't deal with a lot of rock or hip-hop or something, but you really have to know what's going on everywhere. So I read all the trade magazines are an amazingly fertile place to just kind of figure out what's going on, what's working. I would say if folks have access to Billboard magazine or something, read it. It's a good education in itself. I say reading up on the history of not only the music, but the history of the music industry. There are scads of books that are, everything from, very much like a book like Don Passman's book, is an important one just to know how the industry works, but also books like Hitman or something like that to show how the music industry has developed. Mansion on the Hill is another great book that just basically shows how the industry went from a very ragtag sort of thing into the very corporate element that it is today. And it's really important to know your history and to know about how all the record labels that are around today that are just kind of bandied about, whether it be Atlantic Records or Blue Note Records or some of these labels that are going away, A&M Records or Island Records. I mean, they have such rich individualized histories that are now gone because they've all been merged together. But they're great stories, and they're great people, great personalities that we're starting to lose now, and unfortunately, it's becoming a little more boring. It's becoming a little more corporate, where you don't have the outsized personalities that you had 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. So I think that's really important. I mean, I think also being involved in the local music scene, wherever they are, whether it's on campus, whether it's in the city or town that they grew up in, is really, really important, and figure out what it is. Even if it's the tiniest little place, even if it's an open mic night at a coffee shop, get involved or go to it and see what people are doing, because people now, the record industry is going to contract, and it's going to be, the independent sector is going to become that much more important, where it's a lot cheaper and a lot more possible to do it on your own now, where record labels and promotion companies and artist management firms are popping up everywhere. You don't have to be in New York or Nashville or Los Angeles anymore. So get involved with the local scene. I also think that obviously interning at a major label, even if you have no intention of working in a major label, can be extraordinarily useful, just to see, even if it's just to figure out how not to do things, just to be very aware of what's going on and be very careful not to get sucked into the pseudo slick sort of romance of the whole thing, because I think a lot of young people do get they just want to be players in the record industry, and they get stuck. And I think they have to always focus on why they want to be in the music industry, which is to be around music and to propagate music. That's important. But yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of really kind of immersing yourself in music and every kind of music, and to be very open-minded about it. And then obviously just to immerse yourself in every aspect of the music industry and not get stuck in one. Even if you're going to be a entertainment lawyer, learn everything else. You know, it's like a restaurant, you know, when you have to train and start in the being a dishwasher, and you do every other job. If you're going to be a manager of the restaurant, it should be the same way. You know, it doesn't mean you have to be David Geffen and start in the mailroom or whatever, but it helps to understand every aspect, is to know how radio works, even if you don't think you'll ever need it, to know how publicity and works, and how sales, you know, retail works, so that you can, you know, speak authoritatively about everything.